Welcome to Forward with NACCE, Inspiring Entrepreneurial Action, a podcast that shares the stories of everyday entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial leaders, and the communities that support us. We hope that this diverse collection of stories brings you inspiration, inspires you to take action, and ignites entrepreneurship in your community as we make our way forward together.
Welcome to this episode of Forward with NACCE. I'm excited to bring a guest into our virtual studio who I met at a conference in DC. He's an entrepreneur, he's a community college trustee, he's the co-owner of a coffee shop. So we have lots and lots to talk about. I'm so happy that you're here, Jake Starkey. Let's begin our conversation and tell us a little bit about you. What in your life brought you into the career path that you have today?
So a couple of things. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be a part of it. I think for me, the thing that stands out is my wife's an educator. And I've been blessed with some really good teachers along the way that put up with a stubborn kid and help them kind of see creativity and kind of see opportunities that weren't necessarily there. You know, I think sometimes things can be very rote in how things are taught, and I had some great teachers who just took the opportunity to feed into me and give me an opportunity to try new things that were outside the box. And so everything from, honestly, the chairwoman of ACC right now is my former teacher. She likes to point that out when we go to meetings. But she was one of my teachers growing up, and it was the same thing. She just believed in students and believed in giving kids an opportunity. And so throughout life, I've tried to turn around and do the same thing as well. So any opportunity I can to help, I try to.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, you know, like you, I was that kind of student too. I loved college when I got into college and graduate school, but I remember sitting, especially in high school, feeling like I was chained to a desk. And I just,
Yes.
Once I got to college, you could pick your classes, you could change your major, you could sign up for all these things you'd never heard of before. And so I think, Jake, to some degree, higher education is made for people like ourselves that maybe don't necessarily fit into the mold. But like you, I really fell in love not only with education, but with community college because of its open access nature, and it's just very inclusive, and I think it uplifts a lot of people. And you know, there's a lot. So it's thank you for sharing that. And I know one of the things that you did, same as us, is you launched a podcast of your own during the pandemic, and it's got a really cool aligned mission. So why don't you just, so we don't lose that point, share with us a little bit about what your podcast is about, where do you produce it, and maybe one story that resonates of something that you enjoyed over the last year or so.
Yeah. So our podcast is called Creating Community with Dorian and Jake. And it's my business partner and I. We own 1820 Coffee. We own 1820 Marketing together. And the thing is that the mission statement for 1820 Coffee House is creating community one cup at a time. And we noticed that as people came into the coffee shop, they would tell these great stories and they would just hang out. And this was during the pandemic. And so it was the first time that a lot of people got out of the house and they were coming to get coffee. And you could almost see a nervousness about sitting down to even talk because no one knew the rules. You know, it was, can we sit down? Can we do this? Can we do that? And we're like, man, there's so many great conversations that we're having. How do we kind of share them? And so we were able to, being marketers and me having a video production background, I was able to put together the equipment. And then Dorian and I, we find people and we sit down and we always describe it as the first half of the conversation is, this is your life. Like what got you to wherever you're at now? And the second half of the conversation is what you're doing now. And so we've gotten to talk to congressmen about what led them to run for election, from being a sheriff in Fort Bend County to even the weird situation for Congressman Nels was he was on the floor during the January 6th insurrection, wow. Whatever you want to call it. He was there. And so we got to hear from his perspective what was going on. And that was really interesting to us because, we all watched it from TV, but to hear his firsthand account of it was very enlightening and interesting.
Yeah, I bet. And it is interesting too. I've talked to other people about this as well, is really, I think the pandemic opened up for all of us really that need for human connection. I don't know about you, but we actually moved during the pandemic. So we
Oh, wow.
left one community where we had raised our children. We'd lived there for 17 years, and we moved actually the NACCE office, and I moved my family to Cary, North Carolina at the same time. And it was funny because moving during the pandemic, everything was shut down. But a lot of the people I missed the most, which surprised me, are the people that you see at the grocery store all the time, and the people that cut your hair. And it's those connections, the human connection of people that maybe are not deeply entrenched in your life, but they're the people that deliver your mail and sort of smile at you. And when I think about your podcast and what you're doing, it's sort of honoring the stories of everyday people. We try to do that also on Forward with NACCE. We really honor the spirit of people, whether, it's the Secretary of State or, a senator, or it's just an everyday person who has an idea for starting a business. And one of the things that's critical, and I met you, and we're going to get into this in a minute, in Washington, D.C. We were both there for the American Community College Trustees National Legislative Summit. So we happened to have the good fortune of participating in an advocacy workshop and chatted and got acquainted. But I was really interested in talking to you about marketing, because I think that's an area that obviously you are good at. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with, is how do you communicate your story? So I'd love it. Perhaps, Jake, if you could share a couple tips with our audience, whether they're in higher ed, have their own businesses, or just, regular people. What is, first of all, what is marketing, and how can we become better at that? We all have access to social media tools. Give us maybe the everyday couple of tips that might benefit us.
Sure. So the thing we like to work with people on is to let them know that social media is not marketing. It's an aspect of marketing.
Okay.
Just like your website, just like public speaking, just like brochures or anything else you do. It's one tool in your toolbox, and you shouldn't put all your tools in, or let me jump metaphors. You shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. How about that? Because what ends up happening is the number of people that got really successful on Facebook, and now everyone's on TikTok, or then they went to Instagram or whatever it may be. You're throwing a lot of time and effort into one social media, and when it becomes done, for lack of a better term, you're having to rebuild that audience. And so using it as part of your marketing strategy is really good, not your only marketing strategy. I'm really fond of a business owner. His name's Donald Miller. He wrote a book called Building a Story Brand. And he always says, you confuse, you lose. And so that's one of the things we talk about with our clients is while ACC, for instance, Alvin Community College, where I'm blessed to be a regent, we have so many great programs. But if I sit down and start to tell you about all 20 programs, you're not going to remember the first one when I get to the 20th one.
That's right.
So it's, what audience am I aiming for? What information do I want to be sure to get across to them, and only focusing on that. And that's a thing that I think a lot of us struggle with, especially in larger organizations, because we want the opportunity to tell everybody all the amazing things we do. But I know personally, I don't remember all of them. When I sit through a presentation and here's all these great things, like I'm going to remember one or two. And so to me, it's always focused.
Sometimes people talk really fast, and I've been guilty of this myself, because you get so excited and then you sort of get on a roll, and then you realize you've lost people like 5 minutes ago when they have no idea really what you're talking about. So one of the missions that I have for 2022, and I'm sure my staff are tired of me saying this, is really to simplify. I really am trying to not have paragraphs and this long text with all these big words, but I think the way, personally, not being a marketing expert like you, but dabbling a lot in it and having some success, some accidental and some, on purpose, but is really to think about, like, how can we focus more on headlines and shorter words, but action words and things that are fun. And inclusive, because like we started at the beginning of our conversation, one of the things that I didn't love about high school is it wasn't fun. It felt like, first of all, it started way too early. So that's a whole other conversation. Kids at that age do not like to get up at, 5:30 in the morning. But, every once in a while you'd run into a teacher that, you'd click with, and you realize learning could be fun. And, the mission of NACCE, and I imagine what you do as a trustee at Alvin College and in your work, is really try to figure out how can you have messages and stories where it connects to the heart, it gets people to take action, and it kind of celebrates us as people, although we might be very different. So I'd be curious to think, how does Alvin Community College, how does your staff there approach marketing? Do they do it in non-traditional ways, or are they doing like the course catalog and the traditional ways of marketing, or is that not inside the scope of what you might chime in with them?
So I don't chime in with it a whole lot, but I can tell you, having seen it, we do everything from radio ads, because I'll listen to the radio and I'll hear it and go, hey, that's Alvin Community College, to same thing with social media. It pops up on my Instagram feed and things like that, as well as obviously the more direct, the website, and then the course catalog and things like that. So I think ACC is really good at utilizing a lot of different options for for marketing, including social media. And I see it because everywhere I go. So Alvin is a very small community. It's a town of about 25,000, but the college district that we serve incorporates a huge area. And so it's very interesting to kind of see different people, and you see the marketing differ, right? Like you deal with other cities and your local community college kind of thing, but maybe you aren't saying Alvin Community College, it's your local community college or something like that. And overall, it's little nuances, but overall they do a really good job. And I try to stay out of that because I don't want to kind of overstep my bounds as a regent.
Right. You're a good trustee. You're not trying to, and that's funny because in my role too, as the president of NACCE, I really just admire and work with and really appreciate my board, but I don't want them tinkering in sort of the day-to-day operations. So that is excellent. That tells me you're a very good trustee. The other thing is, I was thinking about this the other day. I started my career working in the United Way system, in the late 90s. And it's interesting, they're much like community colleges in some respects because there's pretty much one in every county. Now a lot of them are regional. They're bigger. They're trying to save, get efficiencies of scale. But I remember, I think it was in the early 2000s, they had a campaign where they tried to brand the logo so that they had greater impact. It wasn't saying that every single United Way had to be the same, but that they were going to agree on some basic language and a logo, and then it could be sort of customized to local communities. I had forgotten about that. And then when we were together in DC, I heard somebody bring up that idea for community colleges, which I thought was really interesting. Now, I can see that not everybody would love that idea, but I was thinking about that, especially in the context of rural community colleges. Some of them maybe only have 1,000 students or something like that. If there were options where people could agree around certain messages, and it could certainly be customized and changed and so on. I'm just curious how you would think about that, because I did not come up with that idea for community college, but somebody had suggested it, and it kind of stuck with me as something that might be interesting to talk about.
Sure. So one of the things we always try to focus on, or I'm not saying we always succeed, but keeping student first, right? And so for us, we look at it as, can we create a level playing field where if someone goes to ACC and then goes to HCC, which is Houston Community College, which is possible because we're right next to each other, or San Jack, which is another community college in the area, is it going to transfer? Because nothing is more frustrating. It took me 7 years to get through college because when I transferred, all my credits went away, right? Like I lost hours and all kinds of stuff. And so I like the idea of creating a level playing field with credits and then building on that to being these are things we all agree on as a community college. But it's a weird thing too, because different states, things you learn at national conferences, the fact that some states it's all one system, and then there's just community colleges that are there underneath it, whereas we're independent. San Jac has 4 or 5 campuses, I believe, but we're all, our trustees are elected. Some states they're appointed. Um, I don't know how you navigate that situation to kind of get it approved across the board. I could see it being regional. I could see it being statewide, but I do like the idea that here's all the things that we agree on, and then what is it? In certain things, unity, but in all things, charity. Like try to here's the things we agree on.
Now, what caused you? Because I think that's an excellent point. That's one of the things, working at NACCE, we are in, almost all of the states, and some of them are very different. Like Utah, they really have only one community college. They cover the entire state. It's very rural. Where I worked for my community college for a number of years, where I was vice president, it was New Jersey. So there were 19 separate community colleges. So there was an association, but it was sort of voluntary. And whoever the governor was, they would appoint certain trustees, and then the local counties would appoint other trustees. So nobody ever ran for that position. But if you were an elected official, that was one of the powers that you had, is that you could appoint people that you thought would be really good trustees. And it is interesting seeing how different systems work. But I have to ask you too, because I always admire people that run for office. I don't envision myself ever doing that. What prompted you to do that, and what was that experience like, running for your seat?
So the interesting thing was that I signed up in January of 2020 before the world kind of fell apart. No one was running against me. So we had 3 positions because we're elected. We had one person that was running again, that was previously a regent, and then 2 open positions. So the multitude of weird things that happened is we signed up to run. No one opposed us. The community college had a board meeting and said, look, if there's no one running against these people, there's no point in holding an election. It's just going to cost the taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. They canceled the election to where in May we would take office. But the next day is when the shutdown orders hit.
Oh my gosh.
And so we're one of the very few elected officials that year who got in May. A lot of people, it all got punted till November because you have to have an actual election. Well, there was no one running, or like even in the city elections, they were going to cancel them as well. But the meetings were after the shutdown. So they couldn't have the meeting to then cancel to then do this. So it was really an odd thing. The first 9-10 months or so, we were Zoom only. Like I didn't really get to see them.
And then you're hit with all of these issues. You mm-hmm. volunteer for this position. I mean, that's quite an incredible story. But it sounds. Have you enjoyed it? I mean, I'm sure the pandemic has been exhausting. Let's be honest, for everyone, and challenging on a multitude of levels. But how has that experience been? That was weird at the beginning, but as you sort of move through the process.
It's been a couple of things between the pandemic, and then in August after that, our president announced her retirement. And so then we got on the presidential search, and I think ACC had only had, maybe we've had 4 presidents. I'm trying to think. It's not been a whole lot because we had one for a 30-year period. I like being an advocate. I like finding something that I'm passionate about and promoting it. And that's why I like going to things like the ACCT where we met. Because I can just go and talk about how great community college is, or how great, Dr. Exley is, or how great, mm-hmm. our school is. I'm not really good at Jake is awesome. And that's the funny
I'm like
thing.
That too. But in a way though, I think by virtue of the fact you were willing to throw your hat in the ring and run, and because you seem like a very humble person. I'm from the Midwest, so like people from the Midwest, I mean, so very broad generalization, but they're not people to brag. Like when we moved to New Jersey, that was a whole other, it's just a different culture. Not everyone in New Jersey is like that, but people tend to be much more out there because they have to be, right? It's a more crowded state. But I think what's interesting about the experience that we shared, and I told you this before, I met Dr. Exley through my board chair elect, Dr. Chris Whaley, and I just found him to be just very excited about entrepreneurship. And we were just so happy he joined our conference in Nashville a couple of years ago, just to learn and to network. And I told you this before. I said he is not going to succeed at retirement. He has too much energy. So then, lo and behold, when I found out he had come to your college and reached out to me, I was just thrilled. Those are the kinds of leaders and presidents. It doesn't matter what they look like or how old they are. You need that relentless passion to think about how can you reimagine, how can you make things better for people. And that was the experience, Jake, that I had in DC. I thought it was wonderful. I met so many trustees. That's the first time I actually went to that conference. I go to a lot of higher ed conferences, and it's a lot of presidents, faculty, but it's not the trustee side. And I think that was what really opened my eyes, is the impact that we all could make advocating for community colleges as a system. So even though we're different, we're all saying, Pell needs to be increased for students. Community colleges need to have more than 5 of every $100 that is allocated toward higher ed. That's just not right. And I felt like that spirit of unity, and maybe some of it was coming out of the pandemic, where I felt like we have all been sort of pushed apart. But I want to ask you, and then I could share one thing that I learned from that experience when we were in that advocacy workshop, whether people might be listening or thinking about community colleges or something else. What was something that you learned in that experience that you'll take back to your community, whether it's you as a trustee or a business or a podcaster or whatever, that you learned there?
The thing that struck me the most was how we all kind of have a lot of the same struggles. I think a lot of times we all want to think that we're special. Our community colleges got circumstances that that you wouldn't understand because you're not in Texas or you're not in Michigan or Florida. But it was interesting to me to see that we all have the same concerns, and hopefully we're all rowing in the same way, if that makes sense, to help with grants and things like that. And I think for me, coming in, I guess the best way for me to put it is I didn't know what I didn't know. And so when I joined this board, which is amazing, and they're so helpful, and it's a great team that we have, my worldview of community college widened dramatically. I thought it was kind of one thing. And then even with the pandemic, where you're sitting there going, okay, well, we're not having as many of these type of students, but we have more of that type of students. Okay, well, is it a one-time thing? Is it a turn? Is it something we really need to pivot? Or is it just an anomaly because we're in this weird situation? It's been, the thing I took away from it really was the connections, really. It was really nice to meet. I met Kara Crowley from Amarillo College. She has worked on some initiatives that I am excited to, she sent us some information, and then I've turned around and gotten it to Dr. Exley, and he's working his magic, but it's really good information. I'm really excited to go back to the board, because I'm one of 9, and kind of discuss my takeaways from this conference. It's been I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and just spending time together, like you could have dinner together. And it's funny, in a local community, when you're away, because you're away, you don't have to race home and eat dinner and do all of the things that we all have to do as family members. I think that was really important. I think for me, on the advocacy end, I was very impressed by the level of public servants, and they were on both, political parties. They had, people very conservative perspectives, some, more liberal and whatnot. But what I took away from it that I thought was really interesting, the session with the White House staff and the other people, is really to focus on progress, even if it's small and incremental. It's really important. And I guess I knew that anyway, but I would see people start to go down the path of, oh my goodness, everything is so broken and people don't get along. And I saw a side of, these are pretty high level people, most of them, but just like us, they go to work every day, and, we're not going to solve these problems overnight. But I was very heartened and uplifted by the fact that, despite that some of the major legislation doesn't seem to be moving, whether you're for it or not for it or whatever, but there's still things behind the scenes, and there's still celebrations, and there's still important things to be done. So I just really left with a whole pocket full of business cards and ideas and things the same as you. And I think our connection together, which is kind of, as we bring our conversation to a close, I'm really happy that I attended. I'm just, there's so much more that I can learn from you and about you, but I want to thank you, Jake, and just invite you, maybe if you just want to close out with a word of something that you're hopeful about here in 2022 or something you're excited about.
Sure. I'm excited to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think that with a lot of community colleges, we've kind of tried to figure out what's going on. We've been kind of in the dark, and that idea of like the flashlight, and I can only see what the flashlight hits. And we're trying to navigate this situation, and it's not easy, but it seems like the light's getting brighter and we're seeing more. And I'm kind of sick of the term the new normal, but yet it's also kind of the reality of it, right? Like it's a new normal. There are people that will attend ACC, get an associate's degree from us, and never set foot on campus because they're going to do it all virtual. Mm-hmm. And that is not something that was an option, I don't think, a couple of years ago,
Right.
And so
I think that's good. And, I just one last thought. I agree with you. I think about Maya Angelou and, how she said every storm runs out of rain. Well, this has been like a long storm, but I agree with you. We're starting to see the light. And I thank you for being a part of the solution, a friend to NACCE. And I hope this is the first of many conversations. So wish you and all of our listeners around the world a great day. And if you don't know about your community college and your community, check it out. There's lots of good things to learn and connections to make.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will continue to explore the many ways to define entrepreneurship with NACCE as we celebrate opportunity, failing forward, and success, learning from one another along the way. Subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform and follow at NACCE on social media, and learn more about us at nacce.com/podcast. Stay tuned for a new episode each week. We look forward to making our way forward together with you. Have you heard about our latest book, Impact Ed: How Community College Entrepreneurship Creates Equity and Prosperity? This is our roadmap for building back better in 50 states and globally. In each chapter, we share the inspiring stories of everyday entrepreneurs and explain how community colleges play a crucial role in their success. Visit us at nacce.com/impacted to order your copy now and join us in this work.